to start by reading you some Adida that is not the topic, but it is the right preface to the topic. The topic is the entire essence of discipleship. The title of the discourse refers to discipleship itself. The purpose of discipleship, the nature of discipleship, the meaning of discipleship. So plug in that understanding as the context. Everybody following along? Because you've got to really pay attention to this. This is tough stuff. And not only is it tough stuff, but everything in you is geared to not want to hear it, not want to understand it, not want to accept it, and not want to do it. That's called ego. All right, listen to Adida. And it's a whole page. I might not read the whole page, but bear with it because it's very explanatory. Fun and suffering are two sides of a self-replicating cycle. People who embrace the conventions of the social world in order to maximize fun and pleasure inevitably must struggle with mortality, disease, and bodily stresses. Most such people cannot even imagine living a principled physical existence in which they're naturally free of the cycle of pleasure, disease, and suffering. Ultimate freedom, transcendental spiritual freedom, is something else again, a spiritual matter. Yet the natural bodily freedom of which I speak may be enjoyed by anyone. The usual person does not, in general, embrace the disciplining that bodily well-being requires, unless he or she has no choice, having become so physically degraded as to be forced to change his or her habit of life. Only then does such a person choose to live, at least to some degree, in such a manner as to become healthy. So, are you following? He's talking about the well-being of the body, but it also, the discipline he's talking about also refers to the discipline of spiritual life, not just of bodily health. It is possible, however, to choose the lawful physical practice all your life. By tendency, people break out of such a practice into the fun and suffering worldliness that is everywhere propagandized in their society. Yet within a culture of practice of right life and physical well-being, every person is an example and an encouragement for every other person. He's talking about Sangha, an inspiration to lawful practices of all kinds, the practice of right life, as well as, in reference to diet and health, as well as spiritual life. Well-being should be the sign in such a culture of inspiration and expectation, a culture that transcends the dramatizing of reluctance to discipline the body-mind self, and the constant fascination with the results of an unprincipled life. In the culture of the radical reality way just means spiritual life, spiritual way of being truly in spiritual life. In the culture of the radical reality way, right life is practiced, and the signs are shown in every person for all to observe. So what are these signs he's talking about? They're what I've been referring to. This person is experiencing let go. This person is experiencing ecstasy or bliss every day for a month now. This person is realizing that and having a direct experience of how they exist and don't exist at the same time. These are the signs, when we're talking about the spiritual, these are the signs that he's referring to. In this Sangha, those signs are happening. He's saying that's inspiration and encouragement to everyone else, for all to observe. Following? In a merely social gathering, people seek to preserve egoity and the habits of suffering. Listen to what people say. What do they constantly inspire in one another? The exploitation of egoity and the life of bondage to the body and the world. The speech of every person in conventional society is propaganda. Good company, or the company of those who inspire and expect the practice of right life in one another, is fundamental to the practice of the reality way. Bad company does not so inspire. Generally speaking, people who are governed by the ego are bad company. Such people encourage one another toward a life that may seem attractive, but its attractiveness is only temporary and soon disappears. Sound familiar? Sound like what another guru you're familiar with says? Are you following? Traditionally, it is said that the best thing that one can do is to spend time in the company of the realizer, the master, and to live within the master's sphere. In other words, to live in the good company of those who practice devotion, right life, and spiritual practice in the company of the guru. Not only is the master's company the place of spiritual transmission, of which the master is the source, but also in the master's sphere everyone exemplifies the way of right life and encourages one another in the way of right life and responds to one another's signs, thereby keeping one another accountable for the way of right life that is given by the master. In the worldly circumstance, on the other hand, no such process of good company exists, even though the notion of the, quote, good life, end quote, may be proposed and offered with smiles. Following? Anything not clear? Just shake your head because you can't talk, it's discourse. Okay. The reality way, meaning spiritual life, is a counter to the propaganda of the ego's world. Right life is a life founded in the principles for living that manifest well-being. If you are to enjoy such well-being, you must maintain self-discipline. The practice of self-discipline is difficult for one who is already self-indulgent. Which means all of us. The more, because you are from a self-indulgent culture that worships self-indulgence. The more self-indulgent you are, and the less principled, the more difficult it is to bring the body-mind to a disciplined condition. Once you have accomplished well-being, however, then the life based on the principles of self-discipline is relatively easy, certainly straightforward to maintain. In the reality way, my disciple embraces principles of right life management in devotional obedience to me. My disciple proves his or her practice of right life by demonstrating well-being. And substitute things like ecstasy, bliss, let go, high spiritual awareness. He's speaking specifically about the physical, but he's referring to both. So think of it also as spiritual well-being. If well-being is not manifested to the maximum through one's principled practice of right life obedience to the guru, then the person is not practicing rightly. Following? Simultaneous with the rightly managed life, with right life practice, with principled right living, there is intrinsically freedom in the domain of the body-mind self. The practice relinquishes ego bondage and the indulgence of life as an ego, or indulgence in the exploitation of money, food, sex, and social egotism. All these dimensions of ordinary life are subject to disciplines through right life obedience to the guru, until well-being is demonstrated, and coincident with that well-being, there is intrinsic human freedom. Last paragraph. To live a life in accordance with the principles of right life discipline is itself a kind of freedom. The devotional practice of the reality way is intrinsically ego transcending. I've been saying this to you for years. The right life practice of obedience to the Guru is intrinsically a demonstration of well-being and freedom in the domain of the body-mind self. Did you get all that? Sure you did. So why did I read you that as a preface to willfulness, free will, your will, and God's will? First think about it. Don't say anything because you're not allowed to say anything. But why would I read you that? Bum 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 ba 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 bum 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 ba bum 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 bum. Okay, Alex, what's the answer? Because the subject, although it doesn't sound like it on the surface, willfulness, free will, your will, and God's will. The context of that subject is the D word, discipline. That subject is all about discipline. Remember, discipline. What word is in the word discipline? Right, disciple. So when you become a disciple, usually you don't have any clue that you've said to the universe, I am willing for the disciplined life. The disciple life is the disciplined life, not self-indulgent. So willfulness, essentially, is the refusal to adopt the spiritual life, the real spiritual life's requirement of disciplined life. That's the base for disciples. I'm not talking about ordinary people. For disciples, the basis that willfulness as a context continues to operate in is essentially the refusal to live as a disciple, which means adopt the disciplines that bring well-being in daily life and spiritual well-being. Got it? So willfulness, free will, your will, and God's will. So the inherent problem is that those are, how many is that? 1, 2, 3. Those are 4 different things. Willfulness, free will, your will, and God's will. But they're not supposed to be 4 different things. The spoiler is willfulness. So, do human beings have free will? This is a huge question that humanity has wrestled with from the beginning. From the beginning of being able to think rationally rather than grunt. Because even if you grunt rationally, you're not thinking right yet. So, do human beings have free will? If you've pondered it, thought about it seriously, you've either reached your own conclusion or you haven't. Most people haven't. For most people, it remains an open question to be answered if some clear evidence ever comes along. Swami Satchidananda says, it doesn't matter. Choose one or the other. Either and live accordingly. Either view it as you have absolute free will and absolute choice in everything, and nothing other than that is the case. God doesn't tell you how to live, and there's no real required destiny. Fate is just a concept. It's all your choice. Either believe that 100%, either adopt that as your view. If you're going to say human beings have free will, then really say it, meaning say they have absolute and complete free will, not a little bit or 50%, or in these things they have free will, but in these things they don't. Be really rational and say, okay, if human beings have free will, then they have total free will. And if that doesn't appeal to you, and the opposite appeals more, then adopt that as your view of it. That there's no free will for human beings. It's all God's will. It's all what the universe decides. It's absolutely predestined. Every word out of your mouth was chosen for you. Before you were ever born, it was all laid out. And you're just living out the script. You're just getting to experience the life that seems like you're choosing, seems like it's your free will, but it's being fed to you without you realizing it. You're simply living it out. So commit yourself, Swami Satchidananda says, to one or the other. Don't be wishy-washy. Don't be half-hearted. Don't be halfway. And don't be concerned with being right, because this is a practical question, is what he's really saying. And in that sense, he's certainly correct. Choose one or the other and make that your way. I have total free will. It's all up to me, so I better choose wisely. Or God has chosen for me. That's why the things that happen, happen. They're what God intends. They're part of the divine plan. And I don't have to worry. Doesn't mean take a nap and never choose. It means I understand my choices are divinely ordained. Choose one or the other and view life through that lens. That's his advice. It's very, very excellent, spiritually profound advice. So first we have to say that you can't expect, and you do, everybody expects. You can't expect a final answer from the outside. And that's what people do really expect and want. Well, tell us what the truth is. And people never quite get it, that the truth can't be told. Never quite get it, that the truth is not a bunch of fixed points, fixed concepts. It's this and this and this. That's not the nature of truth. You will never ever hear the truth. You can come to the truth, you can know the truth, you can even be the truth, but you can't be told the truth because the truth can't be said. It can be transmitted as a state, but it can't be said in words. And that's what you're waiting for. You're waiting for the guru or somebody else or the right book to run across finally, aha, there it is. This is what I've been waiting for my whole life. There's the truth. And now I know what it is. You're waiting for it like the answers to a test question, where you want to get an A+, you want to get a 100% score, and you're waiting for the answer to be given. And you're going to wait forever, because truth doesn't operate like that, can't be codified or conceptualized that way. You have to get a better sense of the profound, non-capturable nature of truth. Because when you really get established in truth, it'll be crystal clear to you that you didn't get the truth got you. You become part of it, you become available to it. Not as you get stuck, everybody does, in thinking of the truth the same as the answer to a question. And the truth is not the answer to a question, and no question can be answered with the truth. The truth is bigger than that, deeper than that, more real than that. Remember, the word truth, real truth, is synonymous with the word reality, and synonymous with the word God. So how is God simply a clear answer to a specific question? How is reality? How can you get reality as the answer clarified to a specific question? This is very hard to get. You've got to be somewhat truly already established in truth for this to get clear to you. And I don't think it's clear to most of you. It might not be clear to any of you, but I'm trying to make it more clear. Truth cannot come to you as something someone says or gives you. Okay? So that's the context for the statement. That's Swami Satchidananda's advice of choose one or the other and commit yourself to it. In other words, live accordingly. See the world, see life, see everything on that basis, as that's what it is. Either I'm totally acting with free will, it's all my choice, or there is no such thing and it's all preordained. He can say that as practical advice because he knows clear as day that truth is not the answer to a question, can't be told. He knows what truth is. So he gives very practical advice. Just choose which one feels right for you. I certainly endorse that view, but I'm not going to speak about this topic because we are talking about free will. I'm not going to speak about the topic of free will from that optional position. I'm going to speak about free will as if absolutely you have free will. Because how can you speak about a topic if right off the bat you say, well, it may not be so? You're invalidating the whole subject. So understand, but why am I going to great pains to explain all this? Because you have to understand that when I speak about free will, I'm not endorsing the concept that you have it. I'm simply explaining that if you do, I'm explaining it on the basis of if you do have it, or if you don't have it, if you were to have it as human beings. I'm not saying free will exists or doesn't exist. I'm just saying as an understanding what is free will. If we're going to discuss it meaningfully, we have to start from the position that, okay, let's assume you have true free will. Got it? I like this head bobbing thing. So that's for you to decide whether free will exists or not, or it's all God's plan. Maybe it's God's plan for you to have free will. You would like, I'll say it again, you would like the Guru to answer all these existential questions for you, and that can't be done. It's your spiritual quest that answers it. It's your experience, and it's your spiritual advancement that gives you the right view and the best approach. Okay. So, assuming you have free will, here's the first problem within the context of this topic. Even if you have total free will, is it the same as your will? Because the topic is very purposely chosen each word: willfulness, free will, your will, and God's will. So willfulness, free will, we put aside willfulness for the moment because that has to have a thorough explanation. So free will, your will. Is your will free will? Are they the same thing? Answer is no. Why? Because you're conditioned up the wazoo. Because you are not operating as your natural organic self to either a great degree or some degree. Until you are deconditioned for real, until you are aware of what's in you, you cannot claim that your will represents free will. You're influenced by everything under the sun that isn't you and isn't what you would choose. Get it? You're choosing based on biases, influences, and ideas that aren't your own, that come from society, family, friends, schools, all the influences of early life and all the continuing influences of daily life in a society. So there's no way that you're not fooling yourself if your idea is, well, I have free will, therefore that's my will, I'm exercising my will. You're not exercising your will, you're exercising your perceived will, which is influenced and conditioned. So it can't be free will. Free will means it's totally your choice. There's no artificial influence. There's nobody else's opinion affecting you at all. You're not concerned with what other people will think. You're not concerned with anything other than your own actual, direct seeing, knowing, being, and doing. You're operating from yourself exclusively. You're not operating from the effects of advertising. You're not operating from the effects of the values of the family you were raised in, whether they're good or bad. You're not operating from the general viewpoints represented by conventional society. You're not operating by a set of codified religious principles, philosophical principles, moral principles. You're not living life based on a set of rules of what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what you should and what you shouldn't. The shoulds and shouldn'ts have been removed. Only then can you actually claim that when you exercise your will, you're exercising free will. Following? You know, for Discourse, maybe we should move the TV over there, so or more to the side, so I don't have to turn my head so much. Okay. So, you see that point? That free will and your will aren't the same? Until you are absolutely free of all exterior influences that don't represent your actual knowing, your actual existential, factual, practical, absolutely, there's no doubt about it, this you know to be right, this you know to be true, this you know to be good, this you know to be the right way, from your own knowing, not because everybody says so, not because it's the general view. In other words, there's another way to say it. You can't be exercising free will as your will unless you've gone beyond all beliefs and belief systems. Because all your beliefs and all your belief systems are conditioned. come from an external source, from many, usually, external sources. None of it's yours. If it's a belief, it can't be yours. Because if it's yours, it's a knowing, not a belief. A belief is a pale substitute put in place of where knowing should be, because you actually don't know. So what do you do when you don't know? You adopt a belief instead, which is just somebody else's, ultimately somebody else's view. Something someone told you, taught you, something you read, something you heard, not arising from your own being, your own intelligence, your own wisdom, your own existential knowing. So, if you operate primarily or even to a significant degree by beliefs, and most people even in advanced spiritual life still do, there's no free will for you. You are living society. Your will is playing out society's will, or your milieu's will, or your family's will. So that's the first point. Is your will and free will the same thing? No. It's supposed to be, but for the reasons already stated, it generally isn't in most people. If you were free of all outside influence, free of the limitations of so-called belief systems, then free will would be possible for you. And that's what spiritual life includes. Getting free of all those things so you can start to know what your will is. So that you can start to actually exercise actual free will, not the phony pretend version. Okay. Point 2. Free will is what it is. Your will is what it is. And willfulness is what makes free will ultimately impossible. Even once you're deconditioned, even once you're free of constraining beliefs and limiting belief systems, even if you've removed or risen above or beyond all exterior, artificial, non-you influences, you still won't be exercising free will. You still won't be exercising your will unless you've dealt with willfulness, which is not the same as free will or your will. Willfulness is a form of your will that doesn't represent your actual will. It represents the functioning of the ego in the position of being in charge of everything. Let me confuse you really good, because the truth sounds paradoxical, sounds like you're saying two opposite things, and if it's the truth, it just sounds that way. It never is. So willfulness is an aspect of ego. It's the will aspect of ego. But get this. Ego is an aspect of willfulness. But Swami, how can willfulness be an aspect of ego and ego be an aspect of willfulness? How can both be an aspect of each other? I didn't invent this system. Don't ask me. But it's true. It's the case. It operates that way. So, if you're not sure what willfulness is, just think of it as what the ego makes you do, think, and feel. That you think is your own choice. That you think is your doing, thinking, and feeling. But it's actually the ego running the show. The ego runs the show so powerfully and adeptly because it convinces you that it's you. Because you feel it's you doing it, when it's actually the ego, like the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain, running all the bells and whistles. So there's many definitions that have to be said for you to understand what this really means, the word willfulness. So it also means exercising what you feel to be your will, but it isn't motivated by the power of will. It's motivated by preferences, attractions and repulsions, obsessions, simple likes and dislikes, and the general childish requirement of getting your own way. Willfulness is the childish need to have it the way you think it should be, or the way you want it to be. It's simply stated, it's insisting on your own way. Others should assist with you getting your way. People shouldn't stand in the way. People shouldn't disagree. People shouldn't tell you no. If it's what you want, they should say yes. Or why not? At the very least, be neutral, not be a barrier, not get in your way. So willfulness in the adult, and everybody has a huge amount of it, is technically, on a practical etiology basis, is a holdover from childhood. You learn willfulness in childhood. As you grow up, as you interact with your family, with the world, with life, you develop willfulness. The effective techniques for getting what you want. Effective techniques. Effective just means you make them work for you. They work for you. They may be terrible, but they work. And they may be fine, but the hallmark is that they work. They're effective. Effective techniques for getting your way. Effective techniques for getting what you want. Now, you can probably sniff the problem at this point. What I said before, link it up with what I'm saying now. If your willfulness is your own mind's, your own ego's way of getting what you think you want, and what you prefer, and what you think is best, as if you're the best judge always. Willfulness assumes you're the best judge, no matter what, always. If that's what willfulness is, but you don't really have any true free will yet, and you're mistaking your will as free will when it's not free, willfulness becomes really, really sticky. Becomes a source of all kinds of problems. In other words, you think you're trying to get your preference, but you're doing something much more extreme. You think you're simply trying to get things the way you like, but you're actually very aggressively imposing something on life, on existence, on other people. It operates in a much more forceful way than the person themselves can feel or recognize or perceive. So when willfulness is operating, which if you're the average person and the average disciple, means about 23 hours and 59 minutes a day, you are operating with much more aggressive force than you're aware. In other words, that aggressive force is keeping life out and saying, I'm going to be in a continuous selective process, life, Listen here, life. Listen here, universe. I'm going to be in a continuous process of selectivity. I want that, I want that, I want that, and I also definitely don't want that, because not wanting is the same as wanting. It's just saying what you don't want. So that selectivity, that willfulness, that rising up of ego in response to every moment of life, is saying to life, is saying to existence, I don't want what you're giving, I want what I am choosing. Listen here, existence. Listen here, universe. I know best. I know better than you. Therefore, when I say this is what I want, or this is what I like, or this is what I prefer, that's certainly way better than whatever you have in mind for me. And the universe does have something in mind for you. We'll get to that. That's the God's will part. So your assumption is that nothing is in mind for you and it's up to you, and why shouldn't you exercise your preferences? And you never observe scientifically enough, closely enough your own life, the workings of your own mind, how your ego usurps. Therefore you don't notice that it's only a masquerade. They're not really your preferences because you're not in your right mind. The ego is choosing, so they're not your preferences, they're the ego's preferences, which you experience as your preferences. That's the trick. That's the ego's ultimate trick that makes it so effective, makes it run your life, you don't even notice. You don't even know it's doing it. You think it's you. It masquerades as you. It is the best mimic of you there'll ever be. Therefore, you experience the ego's position as your own preferences, your own wants, your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own responses, and your own perception. When actually it's the ego telling you how it's going to be. And you are simply the slave. You are simply the puppet. You are simply along for the ride, because if the ego is running the show, and it is, just trust me, it is. Even if you've broken through a little of that ice, it still is. You don't know what your preferences are. You've never run across your actual preference. You've never encountered what you actually like and what you actually dislike. You've only experienced what the ego says you like and dislike. It isn't your like and dislike, it's the ego's like and dislike. And they're completely different. If you knew your own mind, if the ego was vanquished and you saw clearly yourself, what's right for you, if your true intuition was operating, unencumbered, unimpeded, you'd be shocked at how different what you actually prefer is from what you think you prefer. What you actually want versus what you think you want. So you have to change your view of it when you feel a want, when you feel a preference, when you feel a, oh, I really like that. You have to start saying to yourself, aha, my ego says I really like that. Instead of assuming that because it feels absolutely true that you like it. I mean, this is a very advanced spiritual practice. It's only for those who are ready for the tough stuff. If you can remind yourself, man, I really like that. If you can remind yourself in that moment, actually, I really don't know if I like it or not, but I do know the ego wants me to like it, wants me to believe I like it, wants me to choose it, wants me to follow its way, because it sees me as the slave and itself as the master. Following? So as long as willfulness is ruling the day, which means it's really running your life, all of your, this is very hard to hear, so listen very, very intently. Very, very intently. Because your ears don't want to hear this. Your intelligence doesn't want to believe this. What you, as long as the ego is running the show, and it is, what you perceive and believe is your choosing and your right way and your best choice and what's right for you. All of that will be false. All of that will be imaginary. All of that will be not at all what it feels like, looks like, smells like, seems like. It all seems absolutely real. Yeah, of course I know what I like. Yeah, of course I know what I don't like. Yeah, of course I know what's right for me, that I should be in the arts versus in the sciences. I'm not confused about that. Yeah, you are. That feeling of certainty, that feeling of I know what's right for me, that feeling of I'm choosing, is entirely a manipulation of your ego. You're not choosing. And when you feel you're not getting your way, and when you feel like things aren't working out, or the world isn't cooperating, or other people aren't making it easy, that's when real willfulness tends to assert itself, and you get a little more aggressive, forceful, pushy, insistent within the situation. It usually involves other people. It usually involves intercourse with other people. So you see it as you doing right by yourself, or trying to make things the way that's best. And it's actually your ego out of control. That's willfulness. You experiencing it as asserting your will, or simply trying to get what you want. But what you're actually doing is essentially saying, screw you, to everything right, everything good, and everything that's actually best for you. Your willfulness is the actual enemy. The ego is not the enemy. The mind is not the enemy. Making mistakes is not the enemy. Insufficient awareness is not the enemy. There's no enemy out there for real. Satan's not your enemy. But there is one. Your willfulness. That's your spiritual enemy. Your willfulness is what trips you up every single time. Your willfulness is what leads you down a false path, all the while being absolutely convinced, you're absolutely sure that it's the right path, because everything in you says so, and you never look close enough to hear the voice that's saying it, and the fact that it actually isn't your voice, it's the ego's voice. You hear it as your voice, but if you listened closer, really close, scientifically astute, observing and listening with every fiber of your being, really being open to it, you would notice it's not your voice. It's not your heart. It's not your mind. It's the ego's vice grip hold on you. And it plays out as willfulness. It plays out as a feeling that it's right to be a little insistent about getting your way. And it even, of course, especially includes all the tiniest things. The tiniest things. Well, of course I should be sitting in a chair that's at least minimally comfortable. If the chair isn't comfortable enough, wow, something is really wrong. You don't have that thought. But your willfulness, unconsciously, in your unconscious mind, your willfulness has that thought. You feel majorly assaulted if the chair is just not quite the standard where you could say it's in any small way comfortable. If you notice it's actually uncomfortable and there's no way to get comfortable, you are wildly offended. You feel absolutely mistreated. The world has spit in your face. Of course, you're not aware of any of this. You just think, that chair's not very comfortable. But in your unconscious mind, willfulness is going berserk, throwing a tantrum. And it comes out in your thoughts or your feelings as, well, I'm not coming back here, their chairs aren't good enough. Now maybe you're somewhere that's the most important place you could ever be in your life, but you'll abandon it because the chair wasn't comfortable enough. This is the effect of willfulness. It comes out in tiny, tiny things. It comes out in huge things, of course. But the real perniciousness of it, the real way it detours everything for you, is all the tiny everyday ways it comes out and influences you and makes you not available to actual reality and to the actual forces that would like to support you and gift you. And you're saying no. Willfulness is a huge no to God's way. And a huge no to simply natural life, the organic, right way. Not right way, it's the right way for everybody. Your right way. You have an intrinsic right way. If you're alive, if you're a functioning organism, there are things that are right for you naturally and not right for you naturally. But your willfulness, your insistence on your own preferences, makes that information unavailable to you. Even though it's there, it's in you. If you're alive, it's in you. It's accessible, but you can't access it because your willfulness makes you blind, deaf, and dumb. Simply think of it as human beings have an extreme position of, I want my way all the time, the way I want it, and that's valid, and don't even argue, and don't tell me it shouldn't be that way. Think about it. Isn't that your real position? I'm not saying that's your thought. You're not aware of it. But if you think about it, if you ponder it, if you look a little under the surface, isn't that the basis you're operating from? It should be the way that feels good to me. That's the refusal of the discipline required for right life. Right life is synonymous with spiritual life. Spiritual life is the way to right life. And when right life is established, it's the way to the true spiritual life. It kind of rolls over. Following? Okay? The light in the room, Anna, makes you look like the wolf man. Okay, so willfulness, in terms of your own perception of yourself and your experience of life, it's absolutely the case that willfulness, free will, and what you think of or perceive as your will are all jumbled together. You don't have a clear distinction in you that you can point to and say, well, I know it's like this. That demarcates those three as here's my willfulness, here's what free will looks like, and here's my will. They're all jumbled together in you. And the reason is willfulness. Willfulness grabs it all, bites into it, ties itself up with the rest, and won't let go. So you can't say I'm exercising free will. You can't say I'm exercising my will. You can't even say I know what my will is, because your willfulness doesn't allow it. Gives you absolute blindness in regard to your own will and in regard to any experience of exercising free will. It's all jumbled up. It's all confused and fused, which is, of course, not the way it is meant to be. So, the thing that people really don't want to hear is that it's actually true that you must give up willfulness. If you're in spiritual life and you're sincere, and everybody I talk to is, it's bad news. You don't get a choice about that. If you don't surmount, subjugate, vanquish, overcome your own immense willfulness, and it's immense. You think it's just some willfulness, it's immense. You don't see the proportion of it. If you don't do that, you can only go a little ways spiritually. You'll only ever be in the beginning stages, no matter how many advanced realizations and insights you have, no matter how many powerful, genuine, advanced spiritual experiences or knowings or seeings that come to you. It won't amount to what you are really wanting, where you're really trying to get to, unless and until willfulness is actually successfully surmounted. It's not surgical, it's not that it's removed, it's simply overcome. Gets squashed down. No longer has a foothold in you to where it can run anything, to where it can even complain or cast a vote. It doesn't get a vote anymore. Only then are you exercising or have the capability to exercise your actual will. Until then, pretty uniformly, not 100%, but 99.99, anything you feel to be an exercising of your own will is 99.999% likely to be simple willfulness and nothing else. In other words, your ego's will, not your will. Your need to have things your way, without recognizing that it's a powerful need, a phony need, because nobody has that need for real. It's an imagined need. And nobody can sense it, can feel it, how strong it is, the idea of it needs to be what I want. I have to have my way. You don't experience it as I have to have my way. You simply experience it as, oh, I like that, or I prefer this, or this is how I am. But behind that, beneath that, is something much more hard to ferret out, going on. A forceful, aggressive, enslaving mentality that is no different than a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum. And that's willfulness. You think you are living by your likes and dislikes or your natural tendencies, and instead you don't ever wake up to the fact that you're living as the slave of your own willfulness, because you think your willfulness is in a funny way in service to you, and it isn't in any way in service to you. You're enslaved by it. It is the complete and utter unprincipled, undisciplined way of living. Makes everything harder, makes everything not the real you, and all along the way is fooling you that this is the real you. So, I don't know. I call it bad news because I know how much people don't want to hear it, don't like hearing it. And that's just your own ego reacting because it knows that we're talking about killing it. You actually must surmount your own willfulness. It's a spiritual path requirement. If you're on the real spiritual path, this is one of the requirements that cannot be futzed around with. Oh, I'll do it 50%. Sorry, doesn't cut it. So everybody says, well, yeah, of course I want God's will. Can't happen, won't happen, doesn't happen. How in the world are you going to know God's will when you're being led around by the nose by your own willfulness? People say very sincerely, and of course they mean it, I really want to do God's will. And every time they say that, listen at Ikoda when people say that, because every time it's followed by, but I don't know what God's will is. How can I know what God's will is? You can't. Only after you've vanquished your own willfulness, then you can. But if that hasn't happened, if you haven't addressed it sufficiently yet, and it takes a long time, it's a long-term project. If you haven't gotten there yet, then the possibility of knowing God's will is simply not an option. Because there's one and only one barrier to knowing God's will: your willfulness. Nothing else operates as a barrier. Nothing else prevents you from being very clear, absolute knowing of what God's will is, what God's will is for you, what God's will is in general. All of that's not hidden, open and available, readily accessible. But there might as well be no such thing as long as willfulness is operating, because with willfulness there is no such thing. No way to know anything about God's will. So you have to stop fooling yourself that it's possible to adjust yourself to the higher order, to adjust yourself to the divine way, without absolutely getting rid of, surmounting, overcoming. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, your own willfulness. So you can't practice God's way or adjust to God's way if you don't know what God's way is, and can't identify what God's way is, which you can't as long as willfulness is running the show, and you're not even sure what that is, your own willfulness. So you have to have a training in how to surmount your own willfulness, and people really want it to be, just tell me, just show me God, just show me your will, show me God's will, and I'll do it. But just make it clear, this is it, just so I don't have any doubt, I don't want to be fooled. Give me God's will for real, and I swear I'll do it. And that's the method people would like to have available for doing God's will and for getting away from their own willfulness. They'd like to surmount their own willfulness using the technique of, I'll just do God's will, I'll just do God's way. And of course that'll take care of it. But it's not possible, for obvious, already stated reasons. As long as the willfulness hasn't been surmounted, you will never know God's will or God's will for you. It's not how it works. Makes sense, right? You get it? So God gives the disciple a method that will work, because God knows your willfulness isn't going to be surmounted in a day or a week or a month, and usually not even in a year. So you have to have the training to know God's will. You have to have the training to be able to deal with and ultimately vanquish your own willfulness. But you can't do it the way you'd like to, through simply doing God's way, because you can't figure out what that is. So God gives you a method. Right? Can you guess? The Guru's way. Because the Guru is a human being just like you and can actually say, do this. Do my way. Do A, B, and C. Nothing amorphous or cloudy to figure out, no fog. No, oh, does he mean this or does he mean... Does God really intend for us to... Guru just says, turn left or turn right. And then everything in you, which is your willfulness, says, but why should I do that? Maybe I should go right. I know you're saying turn left, but I kind of feel like I should turn right. See how that works? See how that works? So God, and I'm not speaking metaphorically. Literally, God actually has devised a method for you called discipleship. Since I'm speaking to disciples, I don't think there are any non-disciples present online or in the room. If there are, then just adjust what I'm saying for you. God actually devised a specific training method, knowing that you can't be trained in the ways of God's way, God's will, gives you the training wheels to get there. Can't go there directly, can't go and collect $200, got to go a circuitous route, because the direct route's not available to you. So he gives you the training method. I know, God says, I know you're not going to be able to do my will, so practice, get trained, and do the Guru's will. You got a Guru, I gave you one. So do that guy's will, that woman's will. If you can't do that, of course you're never going to be able to do my will. Because that's your training, that's your practice, that's your learning curve. Do this person's will. If you can't do one frickin' person's will, how are you going to do God's will? If you can't do one person's simple will, turn left, turn right, be here at 2 o'clock. If you can't do that, how are you going to surmount your own willfulness? It simply shows ongoing that you're not ready or willing yet to deal with your own willfulness. It's all part of the same one package. So that's why the word disciple is there from the word discipline, Because the way out of willfulness, the way to vanquish your willfulness, is by doing the discipline of the Guru's will. Each time, in small ways and large ways, when the choice is possible of I can do my will, or what I perceive to be my will, which I now know is my willfulness, or I can do the Guru's will, the Guru's way, what the Guru suggests, or even what the Guru instructs, or even what the Guru directs. That's my choice. My way or their way. My way is the way of non-training. The willfulness continues, the self-indulgence continues, the undisciplined, unprincipled life continues. The way of pleasure followed by suffering continues. Or the Guru's way. Practice for learning God's way. Practice for complying with God's will. If I comply with the Guru's will for real, I am practicing how to comply with God's will. You don't start at the university, you start in kindergarten. And you work your way up. The Guru is the grade school. And God is college, university. You won't do God's will if you refuse. If you're a disciple, you will never do God's will, and you'll never know God's will if you refuse to do the Guru's will. That's what God has given you as the method to get to Him, to get to His will, to get to the way of non-willfulness, which is the way of right life, which is the way of actual spiritual life. So you didn't know it when you asked for initiation, but you've actually asked for the once and for all vanquishing of your own willfulness, and only you can do it. I can very effectively assist you, very for real support you, and absolutely continue to encourage you, and everything I've ever given you or asked of you or suggested to you has been and will continue to be in the service of that, and is specifically geared to that. Because that's the whole show, folks. That's the essence of what it's all about. What are you doing when you cultivate more devotion, when you become more devoted? You're getting more out of your own willfulness. What does it mean to love the Guru? It means you're willing to do the Guru's way instead of your own willfulness preference. What's surrender? Why all the emphasis in every tradition and every way of surrender? Always it's about ultimately surrender. What's surrender? The actual giving up of your own willfulness. What are you surrendering? Your willfulness, nothing else. You think your willfulness is your best life. You get to have your way. Your willfulness is the direction away from God and veering as far away as possible from truth, and guarantees you can't know yourself in any meaningful way. And in this hour and 20 minutes, we've only scratched the surface. So don't walk away from this discourse thinking, oh, well, I get it now. He explained it good enough, and I have some understanding I didn't have before. No, you don't. That's your willfulness. That's your ego. Oh, now I get it. People spend lifetimes trying to get this. You're not going to get it in an hour and 20 minutes. So let us know if there's any interest in this being a course, because I need to decide whether I'm going to continue to speak about it as a discourse, which is one mode of putting it in front of you and helping you get it, or as a actual more structured course, which is just another mode. It's not a huge difference, but depends what you're going to go for. I want to give you what you're going to go for because this is the most important subject there could be. This is not as easy as it sounds. This is the toughest stuff. Doesn't sound like it, but it actually is. So I'm serving you best if I'm serving you in the way that you'll come around for it. So I would like to hear whether you would like more discourse evenings as the way to continue with this topic, or an actual more structured course that you sign up for. Discourses are free and you're always welcome to donate, but not required to. But if it's a course, then we charge something, usually not a lot so far. We've never charged much for a course. So factor that in. But a course is, of course, a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse. A course is, of course, a little more involved and goes a little further, gets into it a little more. But if we never have a course and we never have another discourse on it, your discipleship and everything I say to you and everything we do together is absolutely to address this. That's what it's all about. That is what prevents everything you want, your own willfulness, which you don't experience as foreign to you or working against you, but it's exactly those things. You actually experience it as simply what you want or like. But every time existence breaks through and gives you what it wants to give you, you're 10 million times better off than what you wanted. So let me know.